Hello! Ako po si Trisha Aquino, Pumapodcast. You're listening to Teka Teka News, balitang thinking, hindi breaking. August 9 is National Indigenous Peoples Day. We commemorate it every year in line with government policy to advance the rights and well-being of IPs. But nearly 25 years since the historic enactment of the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, or IPRA, what's there to celebrate? And what challenges remain for our katutubos and the lands they fight for? The lands they fight for all of us.
The Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, or Republic Act number 8371, was passed in 1997, and this was supposed to be the primary legislation covering the rights of Indigenous peoples.
That's Attorney Ice Bagilat. Proudly descended from katutubos with roots in the Tuwali tribe in Ifugao, Attorney Ice is not only a lawyer, he's a teacher. And he's about to launch a new Indigenous Peoples program at the University of the Philippines College of Law. Attorney Bagilat wants to improve how IP law and rights are taught and understood.
This is actually a revolutionary law, as I always say, because this was passed even before the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This remains to be one of the most comprehensive laws relating to Indigenous peoples around the world. Ito ang ginagamit nila as a model legislation.
IPRA, he stresses, made us pioneers in IP legislation.
It included a bundle of rights recognizing the rights of Indigenous peoples, di ba? This included, among others, the right of Indigenous peoples to their ancestral domain and lands, the right to cultural integrity, the right to social justice and human rights, and the right against discrimination. So the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples was also created under this law to make sure na sila yung babantay at magtratrabaho towards the goals of the law.
For all its groundbreaking potentials, Attorney Bagilat says the impact of IPRA is held back by ironic realities. For starters, its own beneficiaries, karamihan ng mga katutubo mismo, don't actually understand the law. Una, may language barrier. IPRA has 13 chapters and 84 sections, all in English. And there are hardly any translations publicly available. It's the first thing Attorney Ice wants to change. Last year, he published Translating Justice, a handbook on Indigenous people's rights. Meron na siyang Tagalog, Cebuanon, and Ilocano translations of IPRA and of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Nung binibigyan namin sila ng explanation tungkol sa karapatan nila, tuwan-tuwa sila about the developments. Uy, may batas pala para sa atin. Uy, pwede pala natin gamitin ito. Pero nung binigyan namin sila ng kopya, tapos English, teka lang. Tapos ano nangyari? Pinasa nila sa mga nakapag-aral na miyembro ng community.
And take note, major languages pa lang yan ng Pilipinas. Once you get into the geographic and cultural diversity of our IPs, access to the IPRA becomes even more challenging.
Imagine yung mga kabundukan natin kung saan sila kadalasan nakikita. O kaya dun sa mga areas na medyo, masasabing vulnerable areas nga talaga dahil nga hindi accessible. So you need to understand that diverse din talaga ang mga IPs throughout the Philippines, no? For example, for us, Ifugaos, we are actually privileged, diba? Kasi we are majority within our province. Malaking pinagkaiba nun sa mga Aitas na minorities tapos nakalat-kalat pa in Central Luzon.
A lot of Indigenous people's issues have to do with ancestral domain, about land. When communities work for the rights of IPs over ancestral domains, for example, they need to apply for certificates of ancestral domain title, or CADTs. But the rules and formalities can be so inaccessible and incomprehensible that NGOs have to come in to help them accomplish the forms.
Ang ginagawa nila, tinuturuan nila kung paano mag-mapping, diba? Tapos kung paano i-fill up yung mga required documentation para sa CADT. And then sila yung nagtuturo papunta dun sa mga government agencies sa NCIP. Minsan sila na din yung kumakausap.
Legal aid clinics and the public attorney's office then offer their services to IPs.
Ginagawa nila access to justice naman when it comes to filing cases in courts because usually IPs are considered to be indigents.
So there are efforts to bridge the law and the IPs. But even in these relationships, there are challenges.
Una, nahihirapan silang kausapin. Nahihiya, magkaiba pa rin ang lengguwahe. Explain ng abogado sa English, kakausapin, for example, sa lengguwahe nila na hindi naman naiintindihan. And then frustrated lang. Pangalawa, pagpunta pa lang mula sa community papunta dun sa office ng legal aid o kaya pagpunta sa PAO, diba? When you go to some courts, nakachinelas bawal. Paano pa yung mga hindi talaga nagsusuot ng balat? Bawal ang leather shoes.
The challenges to the law itself, meanwhile, never went away. Because the fight over land, whether with foreign invaders or dominant interests here at home, never goes away. The roots of the problem are historical.
Immediately after it was passed, ang daming nagreklamo because people were scared actually with the notion of indigenous peoples having ownership. In their mind, it's ownership over the land. Tama ba sila to say na meron bang conflict yan sa Regalian Doctrine that's also embedded in the 1987 Constitution? Ang Regalian Doctrine, ang idea kasi dyan is that everything is owned by the state, okay? Because this was passed on to the current government by the Spanish before, and then from the Spanish crown, it was passed on to the next government, and then from the American, and then to the Philippines. Okay, so parang ang control dapat niyan is supposedly with the government. Ang IPRA recognizes that if indigenous peoples were there since time immemorial, therefore, they have rights over the land. Ang tanong, ano yung rights? Is it ownership or is it just as managers of the lands? Under the IPRA actually, managers or stewards of the land ang tawag. Hindi naman ibig sabihin yan talaga ibebenta nila.
When the IPRA was implemented, the next challenge was capacity.
Because part of the jobs of the NCIP was the delineations for the ancestral domain. So imagine plotting lands. When you try to plot lands, sino mga experts ang kailangan dyan, di ba? So geologists. What happened then was, gumawa sila ng mga ancestral domain pero hindi nila na-plot out properly. So ngayon, ang daming pumasok, ang daming nakatunog na merong batas, and then ang daming nag-attempt. And magugulat ka, meron pa nga daw nag-apply covering the whole Philippines. Parang lahat pa rin ay nag-a-attempt na intindihin kung paano ba i-apply talaga.
Attorney Bagilat says what's exciting and exasperating about the IPRA and its continuing challenges is that the benefits and impact of empowering our katutubos is not only clear, it's documented and demonstrable. The World Bank says there are more than 400 million indigenous people globally. But while they make up only around 5% of the global population, they safeguard 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity.
And then if you compare the maps of the Philippines, if you look at areas where indigenous peoples are, you'd be amazed. Yung covered forest areas pa rin ng Pilipinas ay actually yung areas kung nasaan ang mga IPs. Diba? So ano yung ibig sabihin nito? Yung mga last protected areas natin kung nasaan ang ating mga gubat ay actually mga lugar kung nasaan ang mga IPs natin. At sila actually na papangalagaan nito.
One great example of this is the experience of the Ikalahan Kalanguya tribe in Nueva Vizcaya. It has a CADT in Central Luzon.
Alam mo ba na ito lang yung isa sa mga areas kung saan merong positive net forest growth sa Pilipinas? Meaning mas lumaki pa.
He also cites experience in Cagayan de Oro.
So sa mga talaandig naman, ang ginagawa nila ay sila yung nagpapangalaga ng mga water reservoir dito sa CDO at sila yung nag-e-ensure na hindi babagsak yung tubig sa CDO. So if we remember before, di ba, the tragedy before ng mga bagyo sa CDO tapos bumagsak mula sa bundok. Ngayon sila ang meron system to ensure na mapangalagaan ito. Tapos actually they are paid. part na din nun, recognition na dahil sa services nyo, you deserve to be paid. Hindi gaano pinag-uusapan ito. Pero meron na din tayong mga dinedevelop na ngayon na sistema tulad no sa CDO, yung Payment for Ecosystem Services.
Punbanganan banano agapawan
Again, I'm Trisha Aquino, Puma Podcast. You're listening to Teka Teka News. This episode was written by myself. It was edited by Robbie Alampay. This episode was put together by audio editor Carl Sayat. To listen to more of the Hudhud of the Ifugao, which is a chant that tells over 200 stories tied to rice cultivation, look for the video #Road to Kiangan, Teddy Bagilat for Senator on his YouTube channel. Or you can search for Hudhud chants of the Ifugao on the UNESCO website, unesco.org. UNESCO recognizes the Hudhud as a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. If you like this episode, please give our newest episode on A Better Normal a try. It's about what we can learn from IPs about climate action. And if you like the show, share it with a friend or two. And please do leave us a 5-star rating on your podcast app. It really helps get the word out about our show and helps us continue to do what we love.
Adama